9 out of 10 CROs I talk to, when I ask them about the top priority in their business, it's always pipeline generation. But I don't think that's always right. The first thing I want to ask people about is, are you closing enough of the pipeline that you're already generating? What is the point of spending more effort and money to generate more pipeline just to lose these deals because the team is not following a consistent sales process to close them? That's the first thing that should be fixed. Let's say your average sales cycle is 90 days. If you are still working a deal at 185 days, you have virtually zero chance of winning that deal. Sure, every once in a while there's an exception, but I've seen organizations where this is half their pipeline because nobody wants to close out a deal and admit that they lost the deal. This inflates their close rate because if we're looking at the number of deals we won divided by the total number of deals we won or lost, not including the deals still in pipeline, then we have an inflated close rate if we just keep dragging these zombie deals along. Welcome to Go-to-Market Science. In this podcast, we share tangible, actionable playbooks from the trenches, working as go-to-market strategy and RevOps consultants for our clients here at Union Square Consulting, and candid conversations with revenue leaders in the market that have been there. Now let's get into it.
Welcome back to Go-to-Market Science. I'm Rachael Bueckert, and with me today is Eddie Reynolds, our CEO and founder. Hey, Eddie.
How's it going?
It's going good. So today we are going to be talking about how CROs and go-to-market ops analyze metrics to improve revenue. And so this topic is kind of based off of a newsletter that we wrote last year or the year before, a little while ago. We want to touch on it again and just kind of refresh these insights and add more things to it. And we'll probably write another newsletter on it based on this podcast with these new insights. So we'll plug that into the show notes if anyone's interested in reading both or one of those newsletters.
Cool. Yeah, we were trying to prep for this, and you're asking me about this newsletter we wrote. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, yeah, we can totally dive into this, but I can also see how the conversation could go, a different angle. And usually we really prep this and we're like, we got to talk about this thing and then this thing and then this thing. But I think this topic, there's so much to touch on, and maybe it'll just be fun to just see where this conversation goes.
Wing it.
I got a lot to say on this. We'll just wing it. And then we might end up writing another article on it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So start us off, Eddie. When we're first starting to work with a new client and their CRO, what is the initial thing that we look at and why?
So I want to start by sharing the dream scenario for us in go-to-market ops working with a CRO, and then the reality that is never the dream scenario. So the dream scenario for me is we go in and I pull up their pipeline report and I'm like, your close rate is this and your sales cycle is this. And so we need to tweak this and we need to tweak that. And then let's take a look at your lead conversion rates and your outbound conversion rates and your retention rates, your customer health scores, how much pipeline expansion pipeline you're generating, and what your close rates are on this, etc. And the thing is if we just did a podcast about that, anybody listening to this could just Google that, and I don't think there'd be a lot of value. The dream of this scenario is that we do all that work, and then we go to the CRO, and we're like, Mr. Ms. CRO, check out all these insights that we've uncovered for you. Your close rate is only 10%, and if you did these 3 things, you could fix your closing process. And we tried that again and again and again, and we just fall flat on our face. It never works. And the reason is 2 things. Number one, the CRO immediately just looks at us like we're stupid, and they're like, yeah, I knew that. And the reason the close rate's 10% is because my reps aren't logging their deals into Salesforce properly. And I know that this is a problem. I need to fix this. And then separately, they're like, I'm working all these deals. I know what's going on with them. This isn't new information for me. So where do we go from here? This makes this a lot harder and something we spent a lot of time thinking about. So I'll stop there and I'll allow you to ask the next question instead of just rambling on. But this is the big challenge that we're facing and many people in ops are facing and CROs themselves are facing.
Yeah. So, I guess the next question would be where do you go from there? Do we look at whether those metrics are even accurate, or if the CRO knows that it's not accurate because their reps aren't, plugging things into Salesforce correctly, what kind of information or where can we go next that's actually going to be helpful for them?
One of the things that we've learned is that you can get a lot further by asking some pretty basic questions. The questions that we ask in our go-to-market diagnostic. than necessarily looking at reports. And I made this mistake myself where I've dug through all of the data and then I've gone to like one of our clients and I say like, here's all these issues, and then kind of fell on my face. And it was a lot of time and effort, and I could have like came to the same conclusion by just having a short conversation with somebody. However, I will also call bullshit on this a little bit. So let's use pipeline as an example. Everybody knows the metrics to look at in pipeline. It's close rate, sales cycle, average deal size, and then of course the amount of pipeline that you're generating. So let's say that I'm looking at somebody's pipeline. Before I even look at it, I can ask some basic questions. I can say, do you feel like your reps follow a consistent sales process? Do you feel like they're only putting deals into the pipeline that are qualified? Do you feel that they're taking deals out of the pipeline when they're not going to win them? Now, I jumped ahead a little bit because a lot of times the mistake I've made in the past is I'll ask a CRO, well, do you guys think that you're good at winning the deals in your pipeline? Are you good at closing the deals that you're already generating? And a lot of times I get this, oh yeah, we're pretty good. We follow a good sales process. Like, think we're doing a pretty good job there. But then I dig in a little bit and I'm like, so if I pulled up the pipeline report right now, I wouldn't see very many deals in the pipeline that shouldn't be there, just like deals that like you're not going to close this deal. Like they're not responding to your reps anymore. It's been 3 weeks. And then I get this hesitation. Oh, yeah, we do have some of that. We do have some of that. And then I would say like, what's your close rate right now? And they're like, well, it's like 10%. Okay, 10% is not very good. I understand that that's sort of in the bandwidth of like average for B2B SaaS right now, but that's setting a pretty low bar, unfortunately. And I start to dig into these things. Here's another question. How many deals do we have in the pipeline today that are more than 2x our average sales cycle? Why is this relevant? Well, any sales organization I've ever been involved with, let's say your average sales cycle is 90 days. If you are still working a deal at 185 days, you have virtually zero chance of winning that deal. Sure, every once in a while there's an exception, but I've seen organizations where this is half their pipeline because nobody wants to close out a deal and admit that they lost the deal. This inflates their close rate because if we're looking at the number of deals we won divided by the total number of deals we won or lost, not including the deals still in pipeline, then we have an inflated close rate if we just keep like dragging these zombie deals along. So you can get really, really far. Let's say you're like a new VP of Rev Ops coming into a new organization and you're trying to like figure out where the problems are and go to market, rather than like spending a month running reports. By having these like very quick conversations with folks, go around, ask sales reps like, can you describe to me what your qualification criteria is, what the sales process is? You can really quickly understand whether or not there's a good sales process in place or not. But then you can also look at the metrics and you can see things that are pretty tangible, like deals that are 2x average sales cycle, where, okay, maybe once in a while there's a really good explanation for why we still have a good shot at closing this. But by and large, like that deal is dead and long dead and we're not going to win it. And we're wasting a lot of valuable resources keeping that deal in pipeline, and it could potentially be messing up our forecast and lots of other things.
Mm-hmm. And this could also be deals that, reps don't even enter into the system until they already have a verbal.
This is a great example, right? So, and I'm thinking about one particular customer where I did this deep dive on the data. And like I said, in hindsight, I wish I would have just asked some questions before doing all this work. And you might have I think they had like a 25 or 30% close rate. It's like, that's not bad. Okay. But then when you look rep by rep, one rep has a 10% close rate and another rep has an 85% close rate. Why is that happening? Now, I can make assumptions. I know that there's no sales rep on the planet that actually has an 85% close rate. It's just not physically possible. That's like a baseball player having like a 850 batting average or whatever it is. I'm not a baseball fan, so forgive me if I screwed that one up. It's just not happening, okay? But beyond that, I can also look at the sales cycle. I can see, oh, wow, like this rep closes all their deals in like a quarter of the time of the average rep. Like, is that realistic? You can see what's happening here, right? So there are some things that you can see in the numbers, but you can even more quickly come to some basic conclusions by asking questions. And this is sort of like based on the idea that we have like bad data and or bad process. We do want to take this podcast to the point that we talk about what do we do once we have good data and good process, but you can identify that bad data and bad process or lack of execution with some very quick questions and some very quick insights in different areas of go-to-market. I mean, we could look at like, for example, inbound leads, just like what are the number of activities? Now, this is going to be a problem if you say, well, we don't log our activities. Okay, well, now, like, I don't know what to tell you. We could look at like the age of each lead. There are some metrics we could look at that are just obvious. They're like, oh, wow, like we had this inbound lead and it's still open after a year. Like, okay, that's probably not real. But yeah, like I think there's some really obvious stuff we can look at, but you can get really far by asking some basic questions as well.
Mm-hmm. It's important to note too that we shouldn't just be analyzing our data and, trying to investigate what's going on in our sales process and our sales motions only when stuff is broken. We should be looking at this stuff regularly, having regular monthly cadences doing it, because you might have, an amazing close rate. Like somebody I recently interviewed, Kyle Norton from owner.com, 38% close rate, which is great, right? But just by looking at, his sales process and what his salespeople were doing on their calls and doing AI call scoring and all this stuff, seeing what the behaviors were that actually drove deals, he was able to increase that win rate to 53% in a single quarter. So you might be leaving money on the table that you could be gaining just because you're not looking at this stuff because it all seems fine.
Yeah, it's such an interesting thing. And I'm worried we're jumping ahead here. I guess this is why we usually script these things out. But like, this is sort of like the end state, right?
Yeah.
This is the vision. Yeah. This is what the best CROs in the world are doing, as well as their like heads of, Rev Ops or go-to-market ops, is constantly looking at the data and trying to tweak and iterate on it, right? Like there's this famous story about like this English cycling team, and they were like the worst team in the world. I forget all of the details. But basically, like they got this new coach, if I remember correctly. And what he did is he just tried to look at every single tiny component of that racing team down to like this like incredible minutia of like what time they went to bed, like what they were eating, like, how aerodynamic was the bike, and like every single thing they could possibly do to get an edge. And by tweaking all of those things, they went from like the worst, team to the best team in a very short period of time. I wish I could remember more details on this story. You think about F1, for example, which is, I interviewed Pablo Dominguez from Insight Partners. He and one of his colleagues wrote a book, and they like constantly use this like F1 analogy. In F1, they are literally like restricted. Like you are too competitive if you do too much of this. And so they're limited on how much they can do with this. Because if you think about F1, it's all about the car. I'm sure the racer matters. Like I'm not knocking that. But when you have millions or hundreds of millions of dollars going into like engineering the perfect car with the perfect wing, with the perfect engine, F1 has to step in and say, hold on a second. Like you can only do so much of this. You can only have so much time or so much money. I don't know exactly how it works because, you're just so competitive by doing this. And so they set a bar at a place where you have to do an incredible amount of this, but there's a limit, and that's how they win races. And I think that's such an incredible concept to think about in a mature, go-to-market team. What are all the little things that we can tweak? And the way to do that is you have to build, I wanted to say a process. You have to build an engine that's capable of this ongoing analysis and iteration, right? Mm-hmm. And so the first part of this is we have to have like the process and systems in place. So we go back to pipeline. If we can't get all of our reps to follow the same qualification criteria and put deals in the system at the same time, then, we're never going to be able to like analyze our pipeline and make those little tweaks. But as soon as we do that, and it doesn't take that much time or effort to, overcome this obstacle, now all of a sudden, not only can we see, okay, like we have clear line of sight on every deal that actually goes into our pipeline that should go into pipeline. It's pretty rare that our organization would not have like closed won deals. Like I think everybody's pretty good about marking a deal closed won once it's won. So we can look forward in that regard, and we can also look backward and we can say, wow, like what did marketing do to generate qualified real pipeline? What did outbound do to generate qualified real pipeline? And we start to have this ability to sort of tweak and iterate. That's like sort of foundational piece number one. But foundational piece number two is you have to have people with dedicated time to go and analyze this. And so if the CRO is spending 100% of their time hiring people, training people, and helping close deals, and they never have time to like pop into their systems and look at their data, and then like the head of RevOps or go-to-market ops is spending all their time like updating Salesforce and building workflows and doing integrations and like loading different data for like the new sales rep, then you're never ever going to get there because like people are busy. And then you come and ask like, well, why haven't like we figured out how to improve our close rate? Well, nobody's got the time and the mental space to look at this. So that's another piece. Like, and this is like, I really, really want to emphasize this point for CROs out there. If you've got a RevOps team and you're expecting them to like be strategic and deliver insights, you've got to give them protected time and space. You have to think about how many hours in a week they need to be working on all this like flood of inbound requests, and when and where they're going to like block an hour, 2 hours of uninterrupted time to go dig through this data and bring real valuable, not just data, but insights back to you. Then thirdly, you have to have a mechanism to take action on this. So we talk a lot about what we used to call pipeline council, and I'd like to rename go-to-market council, where there's an actual meeting for sales, marketing, CS leaders, maybe bring product, maybe bring the CFO in and talk about this is what is working. And the reason I want to rename it from pipeline to go-to-market is this is what's working in go-to-market, not just generating new business pipeline. And here are the insights that we uncovered from this discovery process where we were able to run this with the time and attention that we had. And then what do we do about it? Okay, so our close rate is not as high as we want it to be, and we think this is why, but what do we do about that? And we come out of that meeting with a tangible action plan to try a new approach. And then the faster that we can do that, the faster that we can iterate, the faster we can improve our go-to-market.
So Eddie, what are some of the questions that you would ask a CRO? Let's say we're working with somebody and we're looking at their dashboards and stuff, and either they have problem areas that they want us to look at, or if they're just wanting to optimize. How are we approaching that?
So I'm going to first go back to like our go-to-market efficiency pyramid, which we talk about constantly, and I don't have it right in front of me. But I'm going to look at the fundamentals, right? Do we have the fundamental process in place? So like the first question would be, do we have a clearly defined ICP and buyer personas? And if we have multiple products, do we have that for each product? Everybody's going to say yes. And I would say like, is this in like really fine detail, or are we just broad strokes like we target this industry and this revenue range? If not, this is going to influence everything we do in go-to-market across the entire go-to-market / customer journey. Might be worthwhile to say, hey, let's take a little bit of time and think really hard about who our real customer is. The next thing I'm going to ask is, do we have this process defined and mapped out? And this is different for each area of go-to-market. For pipeline, the question is, do we have clear qualification process, stages in our sales process, clear entry-exit criteria? Do we know what questions our sales reps should be asking in each stage, what they should be doing in each stage, and do we know when reps should close lost a deal and move on? If the answer is yes, 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 then I might also want to look at the data and validate that. I'd want to look at the close rate, the sales cycle, et cetera, like I mentioned previously. And then I might say, okay, great. We have this foundation in place that we can start to optimize this. So I skipped a piece of the go-to-market efficiency pyramid, which is adoption. So I talked about having this like fundamentals in place, but adoption is we got to get the team to actually go follow those fundamentals. So we've got to train them on the system. We have to have reporting in place to see if they're actually doing the thing. And then we have to have a regular cadence of management reviewing those reports and holding them accountable to say like, hey, Bob, like I see you haven't updated your pipeline in 2 weeks. Can you please update it? Without that mechanism in place, we will never have reliable, clean data. And look, I'm all for AI and automation, filling this stuff in as much as possible. We do that stuff internally here. Like updating our pipeline requires like a couple minutes a day of time. Like you can really streamline this, but you're not going to get 100% of the way there without management holding people accountable. Once you have the fundamentals and adoption in place, you can start to optimize. You can start to look at these numbers and start to see what's working and what's not, and start to test and iterate new approaches. Now, what that process is going to be different for each part of go-to-market. I talked about pipeline management. For outbound, it's going to be, What is our step-by-step process to prospect into a particular account? Do we need to email 5 times, call 5 times, send 5 LinkedIn DMs? What is the sequencing process? How many times do we reach out and how long do we give it to try to convert an account? And we should build reporting mechanisms around that. So if we see that a rep has reached out to somebody like twice and given up, then we give them coaching and say, hey, it takes more than 2 attempts to try to crack into an account. Now, I won't go into each granular detail of inbound and retention and expansion. We've got this all mapped out in our go-to-market efficiency pyramid, and as well as like the frameworks that go in depth on each one of those motions. But suffice to say, like if we don't have our process defined and our team following that process consistently, we're not going to have good data to uncover insights. And even if we do, we're not going to be able to execute the next iteration because we can't even get them to do the basics.
I want to make a little note too on the very first thing you said about ICP. If you're a recurring revenue business, customer success absolutely needs to be a part of the ICP definition process. You could be, very successful at selling new companies in a specific ICP on your product, and then down the line, they don't have success with your product. They need a lot of tickets. They use up a lot of CSM time. And then they end up churning, a quarter later or, a year later. Whereas another ICP that you target might actually be your true ICP. And they're the ones that stick around for years and years and years. And they have the most use out of your product, and they expand the most, et cetera. But you just haven't been focusing on them because maybe as simply as your marketing department hasn't been targeting them, or your salespeople haven't been targeting them, or your sales messaging isn't specific to them.
This is so critical, right? But I would even include finance in this as well. So when you think about your ideal customer is going to be easy and cheap to win. They're going to be easy and cheap to serve, and they're going to be easy and cheap to expand. So when you look at your customers and say, okay, like which customers have we had for 5 years or 10 years? What are the customers that like stuck around and they had real success on our platform and they're happy and they're raving fans of those customers, which were easy to expand and grow the relationship bigger, of those customers, which were like cheap and easy from a customer acquisition standpoint. And you look at it through all those lenses. And then what you want to say is like, how can we best define these customers, right? It's not just they're in this industry, in this revenue range. It's not just that they were funded by a venture capital firm or private equity firm, or that they've grown at this certain rate. There's so much more nuance to it. It's what industries do they sell into? It's like, how is their company structured? What's their belief system? I mean, here's 2 tangible examples that I've seen from my personal experience. One was at Salesforce when I was selling their marketing automation solution. And you're like, hey, we got this customer and they're on, Sales Cloud and they're paying us a lot of money and they're super happy and successful. Why don't we sell them a marketing tool? And I go to their website and they have a crappy website. It's like, okay, well, if somebody spent $500 on their website 10 years ago and haven't updated it, what's the likelihood they're going to drop $20,000 a year on a marketing solution? It's probably pretty unlikely. Now, the unfortunate reality with this example is you can't necessarily run like, do they or do they not have a shitty website through ZoomInfo? I'm not an expert on ZoomInfo, but I'm not sure if that's like part of their filtering criteria. And so, this definition like rolls into like the actual AE researching the account and then deciding like, this is a good target for this particular product or it's not. Another example for us is, we target, B2B SaaS companies with $50 to $500 million in ARR. We also work with companies in other industries, but what's even more important than that to us, there's also the growth rate and all of those things. There's the price point for them. Like if our customers are selling something for probably, less than $50,000 or more than $500,000, it's kind of outside of our sweet spot. Like if somebody's selling a product for $10 million, I'm like, I don't know how to add value to that. Go take people to steak dinners and go out golfing and like schmooze them and remember their kids' birthdays and send a present. Like I don't have like a lot of like secret sauce for go to market for you. The same thing if like they're selling $1,000 product, I'm like, hire like a B2C marketing expert. Like I don't know how that works. And so we try to think really granularly about who our ideal customer is, because it's not just the industry and the revenue range that's going to determine whether or not they're going to be somebody that you can acquire easily and add real value to.
And if you're wondering like, oh, are you guys going off on a tangent here? Like, what does this have to do with, analyzing metrics and go-to-market ops and stuff. And it's like, well, having that go-to-market ops infrastructure in place to get this data is the whole point. You're not going to be able to even know this stuff if you have no connective tissue between your customer success and the other parts of your go-to-market engine.
Well, let's take this another step further, right? A big way that you're going to optimize your revenue engine and understand what's working and what's not is going to be by segmenting your data. So if you have a very, very clear definition of your ICP, or if you even have a hypothesis on your ICP, and this is something we've done internally here at USC for our own data, you can start to see radically different conversion rates, close rates, etc., for different types of customers. That's why you have ICP, right? So for example, when I share the definition of our ICP, this comes from trying to sell to people outside of this and looking at this and going, wow, we generated 50 leads of hand raisers that raised their hand and said, we want to talk to you and evaluate working with Union Square Consulting, and then lost those deals, one after another. And they're like, what is the common thread here? And we saw that these companies were outside of what is now our ICP definition, right? We could also say, well, okay, we target SaaS companies, and I'm not speaking for us personally at this point. What does it look like for our customers that are selling software to healthcare versus companies that are selling software to other software companies? I mean, I can throw out a hypothesis that right now, as of the time we're recording this, if you're trying to sell software to other software companies, it's going to be, really, really tough. If you're trying to sell software to healthcare, and I'm not an expert on these, particular industries, but I think it's probably going to be way easier. And so I just think a lot of companies don't go granular enough on their ICP definition, and this rolls through their entire go-to-market as well as their go-to-market metrics, where we have these blended rates, and we say, well, our lead conversion rate is X percent. Great. But what is your lead conversion rate for this type of customer or that type of customer, for this type of product or that type of product? And what you can find is that it's radically different. And then you say, wow, we should double down on this thing. And I think a lot of organizations don't do nearly enough of that. Quick pause. If you're getting value from this episode, I want to ask you a small favor. Take 30 seconds right now, open up the app you're listening to this on, and give us a 5-star rating. It sounds small, but it's the single biggest thing you can do to help us get conversations like this in front of more revenue leaders. While you're there, hit follow so you never miss an episode. Okay, let's get back into it.
So let's say, our process is great. Everything's solid. The playbook exists. Stages are defined. It's all documented. But the numbers still aren't where they should be when we're looking at these metrics. What do we look at next?
So I love this concept of reading from right to left. So let's just think about a very, very basic, sales funnel metric. Let's just use outbound as an example, right? So we have our activities, we have our meetings booked, we have qualified pipeline generated, and we have closed won revenue, to oversimplify this, right? Okay, so we don't have the closed won revenue we want. We're not hitting target. Next question, are we generating the pipeline that we should be generating? Nope, we don't have that. Okay, then we look at, are we generating enough meetings? Yes, we're generating enough meetings. If not, then we look at, are we doing enough activities? And then we could look at, the nuance in there. Let's say our gap is we're generating enough meetings from outbound, but we're not generating enough qualified pipeline. Well, clearly this is the place for us to dial in and try to understand what's going on. Now, there could be a lot of nuance here. We could be meeting with the wrong individuals in the organization. We could have the wrong messaging. We could be running our calls in the wrong way. We could be doing poor discovery. There's all kinds of things that we can dive in here and look at both qualitative and quantitative data to try to understand this. But by looking at it through this lens, instead of just saying oh, our close rate's not good, we can sort of narrow in on what that conversion point is and try to figure out exactly what's going wrong in that particular area. Like I previously mentioned, we can also segment that data and say, well, what is our meeting conversion rate to qualified pipeline for this particular industry that we're selling into, or this segment, or this size of company, or a company that has a super sexy website versus a company that has a really crappy website? And we might uncover a lot of data that says, wow, okay, so every time we meet these kind of folks, it goes nowhere. Let's stop prospecting into these kind of folks, and let's focus on the kind of folks where our meeting conversion rate to qualified pipeline is really high.
So how does this influence our annual planning?
So we talked about building the foundation for having good data, and you have this sort of like virtuous or vicious cycle with annual planning. If we start our annual planning today and we don't have good data, then we have to take these wild guesses as to what we can accomplish next year. So we say, okay, we need to go from 200 million to 240 million. We're going to do this by like generating this much pipeline and outbound and this much pipeline from inbound, and we're going to close X percentage of it. And this is how we're going to get to our number. Well, if we have bad data, then we're taking these wild guesses as to how much pipeline we can generate through each channel and how many meetings it's going to take via outbound and how many leads we need and what our conversion rate is, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So then we go into that year and we try to execute and we find out like our plan didn't work out because it wasn't grounded in real data. At some point in time, we have to build this foundation in place. And then it takes even more time to sort of like backfill that information, or maybe backfill is not the right word, but to get that data as we run through actual sales cycles. Hopefully, like then the following year, we're not in this position. And now we're able to look at our annual plan and say, okay, we need X amount of revenue from new business. In order to do that, we need X pipeline from this channel, X pipeline from that channel, et cetera, et cetera. And we can look at, well, how many meetings do we need via outbound in order to achieve that pipeline? How many leads do we need from inbound? Like what is our actual lead conversion from inbound lead to qualified sales pipeline? If we know that number, then we know how many leads we need. And then we can look at, well, last year, after we started measuring real qualified leads and we really knew what an MQL was, or whatever metric you're using for qualified leads, this was our conversion rate. And now going forward, we say, okay, oh shoot, we need double the amount of qualified inbound leads in order to hit our number. How are we going to do that? And we start to have a plan that is grounded in reality. We need double as many, meetings from SDRs. Well, like, did we double the size of the SDR team? And even if we did, what about ramp time? Do we have just as many accounts to call? Like, do we have twice as many accounts that are of equal value that we can call to generate that? And sometimes these are really hard questions, right? But if we are perpetually in this cycle of not having data that we can trust, then we end up going into like our annual planning sessions, having to just hope and wish and guess on what numbers might lead to the target that we need to reach. And that's a really unfortunate position to be in. The good news is like that you can always start working on this today. And if you not only fix that foundation for the data, but you start to optimize, then you go into next year and you say, okay, like last year we were hoping for a close rate of 10%. And now this year we've seen by making these operational improvements in our process, we can actually close 20% of our qualified pipeline. And now when we go into next year, we only need to plan for 5x pipeline coverage, for example. Might sound high. Everybody's operating on 3x pipeline coverage, even when their close rate's nowhere near 33%, but that's an aside. We want to set the foundation to have a real annual plan. The second piece of this is annual plans are only as good as our ability to execute. So we can't just sit down and say, okay, this is our annual plan in a silo. Now let's go start hitting numbers. And then, what happens is like we had our quarterly target and we missed it. And now we just scramble and it's like, we gotta make more sales calls. We gotta find something. No, like it's not just about the sales calls. We had this bottoms up data driven plan and we can look at it and say like, well, what part did we miss? Did we not make enough sales calls? Did we not like spend enough on ads and get enough leads? Where's the bottleneck? And we can drill in like that example that we shared earlier where we say, wow, we booked enough meetings, but we didn't convert those meetings into enough pipeline. Let's drill into what's going on there and what we can do to fix it.
And what about when, there isn't an obvious place that needs to be fixed and nothing seems very broken, but you still have a bigger number that you need to reach this year than last year? I'm guessing a lot of CROs are going to say like, well, just more pipeline generation. But what are some other areas we can look at to improve before we, focus on pipeline generation as a default?
I think one, you're trying to sort of pull me back into this idea of like let's optimize even the things that are working really well. Probably coming off of that podcast that you had, which was just absolute gold.
Got me.
And I get it, right? But I'll touch on two things here. I'm going to touch on like how do we optimize the things that are already working really well, which I think is fantastic. And secondly, how do we optimize the things that aren't just pipeline generation? Because you're right. This is the unfortunate reality. 9 out of 10 CROs I talk to, when I ask them about the top priority in their business, it's always pipeline generation. But I don't think that's always right. The first thing I want to ask people about is, are you closing enough of the pipeline that you're already generating? What is the point of spending more effort and money to generate more pipeline just to lose these deals because the team is not following a consistent sales process to close them? That's the first thing that should be fixed. Now, one might argue that NRR should be the first thing that should be fixed, but I'd say two things to that. Number one, I got to fight the battles I can win. And so many CROs are under so much intense pressure to bring in new business that, you know what, like push comes to shove. If we can fix new business pipeline management before fixing pipeline generation, I think that's a huge win. And that's also going to like translate over into expansion pipeline management. So we kind of kill two birds with one stone. But then what I would say is, if we are landing a bunch of customers and we're not able to retain them because we have a poor onboarding process or poor customer health tracking or poor CSM engagement process, like that's the easiest thing from like a financial perspective to fix, right? Unless we have like poor product market fit. And I'm talking about companies that are way past the product market fit stage. If it's a stage, I think it's ongoing and continuous, but at least that initial, product market fit, companies we're talking about are way beyond that. But if you're churning customers, that's got to get fixed first. That's going to influence who your ICP is. That's going to influence what we do in new business acquisition. And it's going to be this virtuous cycle. If we can fix the problem where we're losing deals that we shouldn't be losing because we're missing steps, and we're churning customers we shouldn't be churning because we're missing steps, and we're either missing the opportunity to generate expansion deals or losing those deals due to bad process, then like new business pipeline generation is the last thing that I want to fix. It's the hardest and the most expensive thing to do of all of those things. So I'd want to fix all those other things first. However, I'm empathetic to CROs that are under massive pressure to bring in new business, and you only have so many existing customers. So I get it. There's only so much you can do there. So eventually we do get to pipeline generation. But I think like if we think about, and let me oversimplify this because it's hard to answer this question across all of go-to-market. The first thing that I want to know is, what is the step-by-step process for every area of go-to-market? What are those inflection points? If we think about inbound, we have a lead and we're trying to convert that into a meeting, and we're trying to convert that meeting into qualified pipeline. What are each of the steps that happen from the time that we've identified a marketing qualified lead or whatever is, our designation for inbound? What's the step-by-step process to turn that into a meeting? What's the step-by-step process to turn that meeting into a qualified sales opportunity? I want to look at the data to see like, where is that process working and hitting target, and where is that breaking down? With outbound, I want to see like, what is the step-by-step process to take a cold prospect and turn them into a meeting, and to take that meeting and turn it into a qualified sales opportunity. If we have other channels like partners, same kinds of questions. ABM, same kinds of questions. We talked a lot about pipeline management. On the NRR side, there's so many steps in that process. There's the sales handoff, there's the onboarding / implementation, there's measuring customer health scores, there's specific tasks that CSMs do to address unhealthy customers, and then there's all the steps to identify and create and close an expansion opportunity. So when I look at metrics, and it's going to be different for every customer, I want to look across those metrics at like, first and foremost, are we executing? Is the team doing all the right steps? If we say that like our best path to retain a customer is to have a QBR every quarter, are we having QBRs every quarter? Then I want to look at, is this driving the results that we want to see in the business? And that's where you drill in. And that's where there's nuance, and it's different for every company and every situation and every product and every customer that they're selling to. But the metrics are fairly common. I mean, we have an entire framework on our website on go-to-market metrics, and I don't think it's valuable to just read off every one of them. But what we want to do is have dedicated time to drill into this. And then to your point about the podcast you did, where Kyle Norton brought his close rate from 38% to 52% or whatever it was, they did AI call scoring, and they found 12 behaviors that were most closely identified with winning deals, and then they doubled down on those behaviors. That's fantastic. That's not just looking at something that's broken. That's saying what's working well and what can we double down on.
How do we know when the process itself is actually not the right process and it needs to change?
This is a great example, right? Or a great question. I want to share a tangible example to address this. So we had a customer with this classic sales and marketing misalignment battle where, marketing sends the leads to sales and sales is like, we don't like these leads are crap. We don't want to call them. And marketing says the leads aren't crap. The salespeople never call down on them. And that's why they're not converting. Well, here's the unfortunate reality with this. You don't know which is which. You don't know if the leads are shit or the follow-up is shit. There's no way for you to know that. The closest you can come to that is to form a hypothesis. So you could say, we think our ICP is this. We think our buyer personas are this. We think that a qualified lead looks like this. And we think that if we take a lead that looks like this and hand it over to sales, if they did their jobs, that should convert into revenue at a sufficient rate. We think. It's a hypothesis, right? So let's think about the scientific method here. How do you test a hypothesis? You have to run an experiment. You have to actually go do something. You got to put the thing in the solution and see if it explodes, right? In this case, we have to give the leads to sales, and sales needs to follow a process consistently across a sufficient number of leads to then see whether or not those leads convert or don't convert. So what did we do in this instance? We were working with this customer and they were sending all these leads to senior account executives. They didn't have an SDR team. So we worked with them to build an SDR team. We don't want to take full credit. It's not like we hired or trained these folks. But what we did is they hired the SDR team and we built the process for them. And we said, okay, I shouldn't say we said, we worked with them to identify, like, here is the step-by-step process that SDRs need to follow. This is how leads are going to get routed. This is how quickly they need to respond. They need to do 5 emails and 5 phone calls or whatever it was. And here's the report to show that they're actually doing that. We got management to enforce that and follow up with these SDRs and say, like, you need to make sure you're following up with these leads X amount of times before giving up, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What came out of that? Well, unfortunately for them, the leads did not convert. Now, we still don't know what the problem is, right? We've executed this process, but was this the right process and the wrong leads? Or were these the right leads and the wrong process? So in this particular instance, one of the things we did is we said, what would happen if we just took these SDRs and had a very similar process for outbound and just pointed them in outbound? And we did that. And all of a sudden, within weeks, they started generating hundreds of thousands of dollars of pipeline. Now we've tested this hypothesis. The outbound process is working. We have reps that are capable of calling somebody that doesn't know us from Adam and converting them into a meeting and then qualified pipeline. Okay, what does that tell us about our MQLs? Clearly, the MQLs are not as valuable as cold outbound prospects. And for me, that is the bare minimum bar. I've been in sales since, I've been in sales since I was like 16 years old. I paid my way through college in sales. But I've been in B2B sales since basically the time I graduated college. And any time that I'm looking at a lead, I'm asking myself, why would I call this lead if I could just call a better prospect cold and generate more money off of it, right? So you've got to set the MQL bar at least as good as cold calling. It should be better. And then look at these conversion rates. And you can look at these conversion rates across a few filters. You can look at how many activities does it take? What is the lead conversion rate? If I call 1,000 leads, how many convert into qualified pipeline? You could look at the activities. If I make 10,000 cold calls or 10,000 inbound follow-ups, how much pipeline do I generate? Or you could just look at, CAC. If I spend this much money on SDRs to follow up with these leads, and I spend this much money on SDRs to do cold calling, how much revenue do I generate from both? And you can't do that if you don't have consistent process.
So why don't you share the example that you had with Scott Sutton on this?
Yeah, absolutely. So, on the last podcast I had with Scott, he shared this amazing example about how when he was heading Rev Ops at ZoomInfo, they cut 2/3 of their leads, meaning they were getting, I think, something like 6,000 leads a month. And they made a decision to tell the sales team to stop calling 4,000 of those leads, which is a really drastic cut. And I'll tell you about that in a moment, but I've actually done 2 podcasts with Scott. The first one I did with him and Tim Strickland, who's the CRO at ZoomInfo. And one of the things that Tim talked to me about on the podcast that I thought was so interesting was this idea that both RevOps and the CRO should be looking at this data constantly. I think the way he phrased it, if I remember correctly, is, if RevOps isn't looking at data and bringing insights to the CRO, then they're not doing their jobs. But if the CRO isn't doing the same thing, then he or she is also not doing their job. So you've built this data foundation. Both should be looking at it. Now, obviously, RevOps is going to have more time to do this than the CRO, but they should both be living in the data to try to understand what's working and what's not. And in this case, Scott and his team had time to look really carefully at these inbound leads that ZoomInfo was generating and to determine, hey, we think that 4,000 of these 6,000 leads are not worth calling. And specifically, if we stop calling them, then we're going to give our reps the ability to spend more time and attention with the remaining 2,000 leads and actually generate more revenue than they would by trying to work all 6,000. And that's exactly what happened. So he made this risky bet, which was based on data and systematic thinking. And if anybody's interested, they can read about this in our newsletter published on December 20th last year, 2025, Proving the Impact of RevOps. And he talks about this example, and their win rates went up, the ASP went up, the yield per rep went up, and overall, they're producing more revenue through this same inbound motion by calling less leads. And what this really comes down to is trying to define what is the bar for qualification for an inbound lead. If I go back to our example, where these, inbound leads were so bad that none of them were converting and sales didn't want to call them and they made more or generated more pipeline by going to outbound, that's only true in aggregate. You can't tell me that none of those leads converted, that none of those leads were more valuable. Not a single one of them was more valuable than an outbound prospect. And the way you could look at this objectively is what are the characteristics of that outbound prospect that was converting? And if we have the same ICP and buyer definition down to a granular detailed level, and then you see somebody's coming inbound and raising their hand and saying, I would like a demo, which I don't think was the case for a lot of these leads, then obviously the conversion rate on that is going to be higher than calling somebody cold. Now we go a little bit further down and we say, okay, well, they didn't raise their hand and ask to speak to sales, but they read our white paper and filled out a form and they attended a webinar. Well, net, cold versus warm, the warm lead is going to convert higher if it's the same type of buyer, right? Especially in aggregate. But the bar just keeps going down further and further until we get to a point where some organizations are where everybody that filled out a form is an MQL, even if they're not in our ICP or our buyer personas, haven't expressed any interest in anything. They just downloaded a white paper and now they're an MQL. So we have to decide where that bar is. And the same thing applies all the way across go-to-market. It could be that we called somebody outbound and we scheduled a meeting, but they're too small of a company. And then we find that, or too large of a company. And we find that with these types of companies, our conversion rates from meetings to qualified pipeline, or from pipeline to close, or from meeting to close is too low. We say, let's just stop calling these folks. And let's focus instead on another type of buyer. And we can see our win rates drastically increase.
And if you're a CRO or a revenue leader and you're thinking this is all great and all, but I don't have the people to be looking at this all the time. Whether you hire another full-time person to just analyze your data, or you hire a third-party agency like USC or anybody else, the main point is that the CRO is involved in analyzing this data on a monthly cadence or quarterly or however often you can do it.
Yeah, I think that this is such an important task, and I think most CROs are analyzing this data as much as they can. But one of the big problems is if you pull up the report and try to look at it and make sense of it, and the data is all junk, then it's not going to be a very meaningful exercise for you. So you first have to fix that foundational, process and execution layer. Once you fix that, it does take time. But again, we're talking about mature companies. If you are at $1 million in revenue, still trying to figure out product market fit, I would make a strong argument that you should still be looking at the data, but you've got a lot less data to look at. What you're just trying to look at is, what's working to book meetings and which of those meetings are converting into revenue. And it doesn't take that much time to look at that data, especially in a small company where the CRO is probably the one making the sales calls, right? But as we talk about a company with 100 million, 200 million in revenue, there's so much pressure to hire and train and close deals, but it's very inefficient if we're never taking the time to look at what's working and what's not working.
we don't want to, plug ourselves too much in this podcast, but if you need help building those foundations, building those connective tissues between your departments, or analyzing that data, or help executing the insights from analyzing that data, that is all stuff that we do here at Union Square Consulting.
And if you want to do it on your own, we got a bunch of resources as well. We
Absolutely.
have not one, but 2 frameworks on metrics. We've got a great newsletter on the Pipeline Council meeting, unless we rename that the Go-to-Market Council meeting, which I want to do soon. And we've got a ton of stuff in our newsletter and frameworks on how to do this properly. The Go-to-Market Efficiency Pyramid lays out how to build that foundation so that you can have, accurate data that you can trust. And there's a lot of stuff in there if you want to execute this on your own. That's why we do this content. So you guys can just listen to this stuff and walk away and not pay us anything and just get free nuggets. But if you do want our help, we're here.
Absolutely. And we'll have a link in the show notes just to that frameworks page. I think we have 12 or something like that at this point. Each framework has a bunch of links to go even deeper into other content we've written about each, specific section in that framework. So you can go as, it's as skimmable or as deep as you want to be.
Don't oversell. We only have 9.
9. Okay.
Sorry, 10. We have 10.
10. Okay,
actually, we have
we're gonna
11 because there's one there was one we made a newsletter and it should have been a framework. But that's amazing. We have 12 because we put so much work into this. But anyway, we're plugging too much. Let's end the show before we become too salesy.
All right. Well, yeah, I think that's all we had.
Rachel, thanks for putting this together. As always, it's always fun.
Thank you, Eddie.
Thanks for listening to the episode. If this resonated, please give us a 5-star rating and a follow. It helps us reach more people, and you get our latest and greatest content without having to search for it. And if you're looking for hands-on help in go-to-market strategy and/or RevOps, please reach out to us. We help our clients with everything from annual planning to improving processes in go-to-market, implementing systems to support those processes, and go-to-market AI. We're always happy to offer a free consultation to help you identify the best opportunities to improve your go-to-market engine with or without our help. You can find us at unionsquareconsulting.com, and the info will be in our show notes.